They say some places carry memories so dark, so deep, that even the wind refuses to whisper through them. Ryan and Elena never believed in such tales. They thought those stories were meant for campfires and late-night scares, nothing real. But when they moved into that lonely house on the edge of the woods, they quickly learned some secrets cling to the shadows, and some trees. Remember everything. Ryan's job transfer had come unexpectedly, a chance for a fresh start, away from the noise and chaos of the city. For him, it was an opportunity. For Elena, a bittersweet upheaval. They packed their lives into boxes and drove miles away to a countryside house wrapped in silence and thick woods. The house stood alone on a quiet stretch of dirt road, its faded paint peeling and windows staring blankly like empty eyes. At first glance, it seemed charmingly old, a rustic place with history, a perfect escape. But as they pulled up to the cracked driveway, Elena couldn't help but notice the shadow that stretched behind the house. The massive tree, twisted and gnarled, like the hands of a skeleton frozen in a desperate grasp. She didn't say anything, not yet. The air smelled different here, heavier, colder somehow, as if the land itself held its breath. Ryan was eager to explore, unloading the car with the enthusiasm of a man chasing a new chapter. Elena followed, her footsteps slower, her gaze drifting repeatedly to that tree. It stood like a sentinel in the backyard, a living monument to something ancient and unforgiving. Its thick branches stretched out in every direction, tangled and knotted, casting strange shapes in the fading afternoon light. To Elena, the tree seemed less a part of the landscape and more a looming presence. She imagined those twisted limbs moving like fingers reaching out, desperate to hold on. That first evening, as they settled inside, the house creaked and sighed with every gust of wind. The floorboards groaned beneath their steps, and shadows pooled in corners like silent watchers. Ryan unpacked boxes with an easy smile, humming tunes to break the quiet, but Elena sat by the window, eyes fixed on the backyard. She tried to tell herself the house was just old, the tree just a tree, but an uneasy feeling curled in her stomach, something primal and ancient whispering warnings she couldn't quite understand. That night, sleep was a stranger. Elena lay awake, the moonlight filtering weakly through the curtains, casting silver patterns on the walls. She heard the soft rustling of leaves outside, the branches scratching against the window like fingernails on glass. Her mind drifted to the tree again, to what secrets it might be hiding. The next morning, Ryan woke early and decided to explore the backyard. He found Elena standing by the tree, her fingers lightly tracing the rough bark, her face pale and distant. "What is it?" he asked, stepping closer. She shook her head. "I don't know. It's just something about this tree. It feels wrong." Ryan laughed it off. "It's just an old tree, nothing more." But Elena couldn't shake the feeling. Every time she looked at the branches, she imagined them moving, shifting into shapes she couldn't quite see, a face, a hand, something watching. Days passed, and they worked to make the house a home. Elena unpacked kitchenware, hung curtains, while Ryan set up his new office. But every glance outside was drawn back to that tree. She caught herself imagining what had happened there long ago. Storms it had witnessed, things buried beneath its roots, lives lost in its shadow. That afternoon, Elena wandered into the woods behind the house. The trees grew thick, their leaves whispering secrets she couldn't understand. She walked carefully, her breath catching in the cool air. A sudden chill ran down her spine when she realized the woods seemed to close around her, silent except for the sound of her footsteps. Returning to the yard, she looked up once more at the gnarled branches. She swore she saw a flicker of movement, a shadow where none should be. That night, Elena dreamt of hanging branches swaying slowly, creaking softly like the bones of the earth. Faces formed in the bark, watching, waiting. She woke gasping, heart pounding, and for a moment she was sure the room was colder than before. Ryan tried to calm her fears. "It's just the stress of moving," he said gently. "We'll be fine. This place is going to be our home." But Elena was no longer so sure. Every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind through the trees felt like a warning she couldn't ignore. Because some trees don't just stand silently in the backyard, some trees remember. The morning sun spilled through the curtains, painting golden streaks across the worn wooden floor. Yet inside, Elena felt no warmth. The house seemed colder now, as if the night had stolen more than just her sleep. Outside, the thick woods stood silent, and that terrible tree, the one she couldn't stop thinking about, loomed with its twisted skeletal limbs. Determined to shake off her fears, Elena stepped outside into the fresh air. She needed to clear the backyard, make it feel more like home. So she grabbed a rake and started gathering the dead leaves that had collected beneath the tree. The sun was high, the day bright, but even under its light the tree cast an unnatural shadow that stretched like a warning. She worked steadily, the scrape of the rake breaking the silence. But then she paused. Something, or someone, seemed to be watching. Her eyes lifted slowly to the tree, and then she saw it, a body, hanging from the highest branch, a lifeless figure swinging gently in the breeze. Elena's breath hitched, a scream caught in her throat, but it spilled out anyway, raw and terrified. She dropped the rake and stumbled backward, heart hammering, eyes wide as she stared at the swinging figure. "Ryan!" she called, voice trembling, panic rising. "Ryan, come outside. There's someone." Ryan came rushing out, concern etched on his face. "What is it? What's wrong?" Elena pointed shakily at the tree. "There's a body, hanging there. I swear I saw it." Ryan's brow furrowed as he looked up. But there was nothing, no body, no figure, only the tree, swaying gently in the breeze, its branches bare except for the leaves. "It's just the branches," Ryan said gently. "Maybe your eyes played tricks on you. Moving's stressful, you're tired." But Elena shook her head, unwilling to let it go. "No, I saw it. It was real." Ryan took her hand, trying to steady her. "Let's just get inside. You're safe. There's nothing here but an old tree." Elena wanted to believe him. She really did. But the image, the swinging figure, burned in her mind like a shadow she couldn't shake. As the day wore on, Elena tried to push the vision away, focusing on unpacking and organizing. Yet every time she glanced toward the tree, a cold shiver ran down her spine. The yard felt different now, heavier, charged with a silent tension that pressed against her skin. That night, Elena lay awake again, mind spinning with the day's terrifying glimpse. She wondered, was it a ghost? A memory trapped in the bark? Or something darker? Her thoughts drifted to the history of the house, the land. Stories of executions and hangings whispered through time like forgotten curses. Had those stories been true all along? She didn't want to tell Ryan, not yet. He was still holding on to normalcy, refusing to see beyond the surface. But Elena knew something was wrong. The tree had marked them, and it was watching. The morning after the haunting sight at the tree, Elena woke feeling restless. The image of the lifeless figure swinging in the breeze haunted her every thought. She needed answers, someone who knew this place, its history, its secrets. Ryan was still dismissive, absorbed in setting up his new office, oblivious to the weight pressing on Elena's chest. So, without telling him, she decided to seek out the only nearby neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Collingwood, who lived in a small, weathered cottage a mile down the winding road. Elena wrapped herself in a coat and stepped into the cool morning air. The sky was overcast, clouds thick and low, mirroring the gloom settling in her mind. The walk was quiet except for the crunch of leaves under her boots and the distant rustling of the woods. When she arrived, Mrs. Collingwood's porch creaked beneath her feet as the old woman opened the door with surprising speed. Her face was lined with age, her eyes sharp and piercing beneath thick silver eyebrows. "I hear you're new here," Mrs. Collingwood said, her voice gravelly but steady. "You must be the ones who moved into the old house near the hanging tree." Elena nodded, feeling a chill despite the warm greeting. "Yes, I had some questions." Mrs. Collingwood studied her for a long moment, as if weighing whether to share her knowledge. Finally, she stepped aside and invited Elena inside. The cottage was filled with the scent of lavender and old wood. Dust motes floated in the dim light, settling like tiny ghosts. Mrs. Collingwood sat Elena down and began to speak, her voice dropping to a whisper. "No one's lived in that house for years, not since the executions." Elena's breath caught. "What executions?" Mrs. Collingwood leaned closer. "Long ago, before this town was even properly settled, that tree was a place of judgment. Harlan Crow, a man with a twisted sense of justice, took it upon himself to hang those he claimed were guilty. Often innocent souls, poor folks caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. He believed he was cleansing the town. But when the truth came out, the people turned on him." Her eyes darkened with memory. "They hanged Harlan from that very tree, burned his body nearby, but it was never enough. The tree took hold of something dark, a curse, a sorrow, and since then the screams have never stopped. Some nights, if you're brave enough, you can hear them, the cries of those who never found peace." Elena shivered. She glanced toward the window where the old tree stood tall and foreboding. "People say the tree remembers. It holds the souls of the damned, and sometimes it calls out for company." Mrs. Collingwood's gaze turned serious, almost warning. "You're the first to live there in decades. Be careful, child. The tree watches, and it waits." Elena left the cottage with a heavy heart and a mind swirling with dread. The house she thought would be a new beginning was tied to a history of darkness, to pain and death. The tree wasn't just a tree, it was a sentinel for something terrible. Back home, Ryan was waiting with a warm smile and a comforting word. "Elena, you look like you've seen a ghost." She hesitated but chose silence. How could she explain the weight of history, the voices she thought she might soon hear? That night, Elena stood at the window again, eyes locked on the tree. A sudden gust made the branches sway, and for a fleeting moment she thought she saw shadows among the limbs. Shadows that seemed to reach out, beckoning. She swallowed hard. The hanging tree was more than wood and bark. It was a warning, a promise. And soon they would learn just how deep its roots ran. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. The stories from Mrs. Collingwood twisted through her mind like the gnarled branches of the tree outside her window. She lay in bed, staring into the darkness, her heartbeat loud in her ears. The house felt different now, heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding a secret they were too afraid to tell. She kept her eyes fixed on the window where the old tree stood silhouetted against the moonlight. The wind whispered through its branches, a soft rustling sound. But beneath that, something else, something deeper, darker. Minutes stretched like hours. Then, at exactly 10 o'clock, Elena's breath caught in her throat. She gasped. There, hanging from every branch, were bodies, dozens of them, silent, still, swaying gently in the breeze. Their faces were pale and hollow, eyes wide open, staring down at her. Elena's scream tore through the night. Her legs moved before her mind could catch up. She bolted from the room, heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She raced toward the front door, desperate to escape. But as she reached the threshold, a figure appeared, tall, shadowy, and terrifying. The ghostly presence blocked her way, unmoving but filled with menace. Elena stumbled back, terror freezing her limbs. Her vision blurred. She collapsed to the floor, the cold seeping into her bones. When Ryan found her the next morning, she was pale and shaken, eyes haunted. She told him what she'd seen, the bodies, the ghost at the door. But Ryan, ever practical, insisted it had to be a nightmare, a result of stress and exhaustion. He didn't believe her, yet Elena knew the truth. The hanging tree wasn't finished with them. It had revealed itself, and it was watching. When Ryan found Elena unconscious on the living room floor that morning, his heart clenched with worry. She looked fragile, her face pale and eyes wide with a terror he couldn't understand. Elena tried to explain every detail of the night before, the hanging bodies, the ghostly figure blocking her escape. She told him about the tree, about the way it seemed alive with something dark. But Ryan shook his head, unwilling to believe. "It's the stress," he said softly. "This move, the new job, everything piling up. You're exhausted, Elena, that's all." She looked at him, pleading. "It was real, Ryan. I saw them. I felt it." He took her hand, squeezing gently. "You're safe here. There's no ghosts. There's just a tree, an old tree. We'll figure this out together." Elena wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her like a silent poison. Was she losing her mind? Was the fear twisting reality? Days passed with an uneasy silence between them. Ryan buried himself in work, avoiding the backyard and the tree. Elena wandered through the house, haunted by shadows and whispers she couldn't explain. At night, the house felt colder. Elena heard footsteps in the hallway when Ryan was asleep. Doors creaked open and shut on their own, but when she woke Ryan, he'd say nothing was wrong, just the old house settling. She tried to dismiss the fear, tried to hold on to normalcy, but every glance outside, every breeze through the trees reminded her. The hanging tree was waiting, waiting for them to believe, waiting for them to fall. For days after Elena's breakdown, Ryan refused to entertain the idea that something was wrong. He told himself it was all in their heads. The stress, the isolation, the eerie stories of a tree long dead and forgotten. But one night, everything changed. Ryan woke suddenly, drawn from sleep by a strange sensation, a cold that didn't belong in the warmth of their bedroom. His eyes adjusted to the darkness, and there, standing just beyond the window, was a figure. It didn't move, but Ryan could feel its presence, heavy and ominous. His breath caught. He stared, frozen. The figure seemed to watch him, then slowly faded into the shadows outside. Heart pounding, Ryan reached for his phone and checked the CCTV footage they'd installed earlier, just in case. But the footage showed nothing. No one had entered or left the house. Confused but unsettled, Ryan told Elena what he'd seen. She looked at him, relief and fear mingling in her eyes. "You see it too." From that night on, Ryan's skepticism began to crumble. He started noticing the strange things Elena had mentioned, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, cold spots drifting through rooms, shadows flickering just beyond sight. They weren't alone. The tree wasn't just a relic of the past, it was alive with something dark, something watching, something waiting. Ryan and Elena's reality had shifted, and the hanging tree's grip was tightening. With his disbelief shattered, Ryan threw himself into uncovering the truth. If this tree was more than just a gnarled old thing, if it held darkness within its twisted branches, then he needed to know its story. Everything. He started with the town archives, old records, dusty ledgers, brittle newspapers tucked away in forgotten corners. Hours slipped by as he pieced together the past. The tree once belonged to a man named Harlan Crow, a self-appointed executioner who ruled these woods with a cruel, twisted sense of justice. He was feared and whispered about, a man who took the law into his own hands. Harlan hanged those he judged guilty, often without cause, often innocent. People vanished in the night, their fates sealed by the rough rope tied to the branches of the great tree. But the town eventually turned against him. When they discovered the truth, the false accusations, the innocent blood spilled, they took him to the tree. They hung Harlan Crow from the very branches he had used for his dark deeds. After his death, His body was burned near the tree, an attempt to cleanse the evil. But it wasn't enough, because the killings didn't stop. Some said the tree absorbed the hatred, the pain, the restless spirits of those it had claimed, and Harlan's curse lived on, rooted deep. Elena listened as Ryan shared the grim tale, their fear growing with each detail. They weren't just haunted by history, they were trapped in it. The tree's branches were more than wood and leaves. They were the limbs of an ancient, unyielding curse, one that refused to let go. The days turned into restless nights. Ryan and Elena's lives became consumed by the shadow that loomed just outside their windows, the hanging tree. It was no longer just a part of the landscape. It was an ever-present force, creeping closer with every breath they took. Ryan searched for another house, desperate to escape the creeping dread that swallowed their days. But no matter where they looked, nothing felt right. The tree, or the darkness it carried, seemed to follow them, as if it had roots tangled not only in the earth but in their very souls. Inside the house, the air grew colder. Rooms that had once felt safe now carried whispers just beyond hearing. At times, Elena thought she heard crying coming from the attic, soft, mournful wails that chilled her to the bone. Ryan found strange handprints on the mirrors, foggy and wet to the touch, but with no explanation. Shadows moved where no light should reach. Doors that had been locked opened on their own, revealing empty hallways that seemed to stretch endlessly. Sleep became impossible. Each night was a struggle, filled with whispered voices calling their names, distant footsteps pacing the floor above. They were prisoners of a curse they could neither fight nor understand. Elena's hope began to wither, and Ryan's rational mind was slipping away, replaced by a gnawing fear that they would never escape. No matter how far they ran, no matter how many new places they searched, the hanging tree waited. And it was hungry. The night was moonless, swallowed by a thick, suffocating darkness. Ryan and Elena moved silently through the house, shadows of themselves now, worn thin by endless fear and sleepless nights. They both knew it was coming. The tree's grip had tightened beyond escape. Every creak of the floor, every whisper in the dark, every flicker of shadow was a reminder. The final night had arrived. Elena clung to Ryan's hand as they stood by the window, staring out at the looming silhouette of the hanging tree. Its twisted branches reached out like claws, the ancient curse alive and watching, waiting. The air was still, heavy with a dreadful silence. Then, without warning, a sound pierced the quiet, a distant, haunting scream that echoed through the woods and the empty house. They didn't speak. There was no need. The house seemed to close in on them as they tried to flee, but the front door slammed shut before they could reach it. Frozen in place, they felt the presence, cold and unforgiving, fill every corner of the room. When neighbors heard screams later that night, they called the police. By morning, the officers found something chilling. Ryan and Elena hanging from the great tree outside, their bodies swaying gently despite the still air, eyes wide open, mouths frozen in silent screams. No signs of struggle, no signs of life, only the eternal hanging tree, its branches heavy with yet another terrible secret. The news called it a tragic double suicide, 2 young lives lost to stress and despair. The neighbors murmured sympathies, but none dared speak of the tree or what had come before. Mrs. Collingwood watched the scene from her porch, her face somber beneath the gathering dusk. "They were such a sweet couple," she said quietly to the reporters, "but they'd been under a lot of pressure. Maybe it was just too much for them." Her eyes drifted toward the shadow of the great tree behind the house, its branches creaking softly in the evening breeze. Late that night, when the world had grown still, Mrs. Collingwood sat by her window, listening. The tree creaked again, low and mournful, and in the moonlight a shadow swayed slowly among its twisted limbs. The cycle was beginning once more, a darkness older than time, rooted deep in the earth, waiting patiently for the next souls to claim. The hanging tree, forever hungry, forever watching, forever waiting.